Daniel Sports Central. We go over our next schedule preview of this offseason, and this could be the Texas Longhorns, team that went 5-7 overall in the 2021 season. Kind of a disappointing season for Texas. This team didn't even get to a bowl game last season, but they're expected to improve significantly going into 2022. Why that is what we go over here today. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also look at their schedule for the first time this offseason. Starting out with your notable games from last season. Once again, this team 5-7, missed a bowl game last year, and certainly a very disappointing season for this team. They got a couple of good wins. Beat Texas Tech 70-35, put 70 up against the Red Raiders in that matchup. Beat TCU on the road 32-27. Lost to Oklahoma in what was a brutal loss. The Sooners, they stormed back into that game. If you remember it, of course, Texas fans would. Longhorns led that game for a long time, and they allowed the Sooners to storm back into that matchup and get the win by touchdown. They lost to Baylor by 7. Of course, Baylor was an excellent team last year. I would say they were the best team not to be in the college football playoff, considering they were the Big 12 champion and won their New Year's Six bowl game over Ole Miss. They lost to Kansas, of course. I mean, that was a brutal loss, 56-57, one of the worst losses, I would say, in program history for the Longhorns, with it being at home for Texas. Kansas, as bad as they were last season, I mean, that's just a loss you can't take there. I mean, if you want to, which this team has done just fine recruiting, and I mean, we'll get into that in a little bit here, but I mean, that's just a very embarrassing loss for a program that is expected to be at such a high level. I mean, you can't be losing to Kansas. Beat Kansas State, though, 22-17 to finish out the season. 4-2 in their first 6 games, 1-5 in their last 6. So, I mean, 4-2, not a bad start, but in the last 6 going to 1-5 is unacceptable. For Texas, Rochford going into next season, this team does have a few significant changes, but it looks overall really good going into next season. Casey Thompson has transferred to Nebraska, so he is no longer with this team. Obviously, last year he put up just over 2,100 yards, 24 touchdowns, 9 picks, and a 63% completion rate. Hudson Card also played a bit, putting up 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick. I didn't see too much of him, but Casey Thompson was the primary starter for this team last season. And overall, I mean, Casey played decently well. So, I mean, he certainly, I mean, he could have been better at times. He was a bit inconsistent, but we'll see how he does as he transfers out. But the big deal for this team, and a big reason why this team is expected to be, I mean, they're ranked in the top 10 of many way too early rankings, and there's a reason for that. Quinn Ewers is coming in from Ohio State, 5-star quarterback who is expected to have a major impact on this team. And I can totally see why. I mean, he's an extremely talented quarterback that can change and that can turn around any program. So that's huge bringing him in if you're Texas. Bijan Robinson is coming back, your top running back, who is going to have a major impact on this team, potentially one of the best running backs in the country there going into next season, as he put up 1,400 yards last season, 15 touchdowns as well. And you also got some depth in there with Rashawn Johnson coming back, who put up 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. So backfield looks excellent. Quarterback situation looks good. I mean, we haven't seen Quinn Ewers too much in college, but I think it's safe to say he's an excellent quarterback with tremendous talent, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he does. I mean, he's got some great receivers as well. Xavier Worthy's coming back. Last season, he put up just over 900 yards. Whittington, second receiver's coming back. Same thing with Washington. Marcus Washington, your third one as well. So, I mean, receiving core looks good. This offense looks really good going into next season, despite this team going 5-7 last year. I think offensively, this team could be one of the best teams in the nation. Defensively, or actually, you do lose 3 on the offensive line, so that is the primary concern offensively. But on the defense, you lose 1 defensive lineman, 2 linebackers, and 2 in the secondary. So you lose 5 starters defensively, which is, I mean, that's more than most teams lose on a year-to-year basis defensively. So that could be a bit of a concern, considering this team also allowed a lot of points to some teams they shouldn't have last season. But defense should, I would say, I mean, they got a good chance to improve, and offensively, it's very clear to me. I mean, this offense should improve dramatically going into next season, or else there's certainly some big issues with this team. And, I mean, if you look at transfer portal and recruiting-wise, this team is 5th in the nation, which is pretty outstanding going into next season. First in the Big 12. They got 2 5-stars, 19 4-stars coming in. I mean, this Texas team, if they don't perform at a high level next season or sometime in the next 2-3 years, I mean, something is wrong with this Texas program, because, I mean, there is no excuse for this team not to be good. I mean, if you look at the transfer portal, you're losing a few players. Of course, Thompson's leaving, but you got Ewers coming in. Hall, of receivers coming in from Alabama, so you got him adding depth to the receiving core. Tyler Johnson, offensive lineman's off to Houston. You got Billingsley, tight end, who's going to be a huge impact player coming in from Alabama. Tight end position looks good. Nair, receivers coming in from Wyoming, and you're losing a couple of receivers. Alvonte Woodard, who's going to Sam Houston, and Joshua Moore is off to SMU. So Moore did have an impact last season, but I mean, the amount of depth in this receiving core, I think they'll be just fine. And once again, recruiting-wise, they look great as well. So Texas, this team looks excellent going to next season, and there's a reason why this team is once again projected to be in the top 10 in the preseason. That's because, I mean, despite going 5-7 last year, this team has got some tremendous talent coming in, and they're returning a lot of key players. So that said, let's look at your schedule now going into next season. You start off the season with Louisiana Monroe. It's actually a pretty tough schedule. I mean, you got Alabama in week 2. That'll be quite a matchup in Arlington coming up in week 2 against the Crimson Tide. I mean, that's going to be an outstanding matchup, rematch of a national title game about a decade back as well. So certainly that'll be an interesting matchup. You got Texas, who's got some high expectations going to next season, and Crimson Tide, of course, the dynasty of college football right now. Then you got UTSA on the 17th. They'll be okay. They're probably not going to be quite as good as they were last season. And then you got Texas Tech on the road, West Virginia at home, Oklahoma, of course, in a neutral location. Then you got Iowa State at home, Oklahoma State on the road, K-State on the road, TCU at home, then Kansas on the road, and then Baylor at home to finish out the season. So it's a challenging schedule. I mean, Alabama's going to be good, obviously. UTSA could be decent if you're looking at the non-conference games. You got Oklahoma, of course, as always, Iowa State. I don't think the Cyclones will be quite as good next season, but, I mean, even Oklahoma State, you got them on the road. They're going to be good. And then Baylor, of course, can't deny it. They'll be potentially a 9-10 win team next season at least. So it's a challenging schedule, but for Texas, looking at the first half here, Louisiana Monroe, I'll favor the Longhorns there. Alabama, that's a matchup that I actually think, I mean, Alabama's probably going to be favored by, I'd say, 2 touchdowns going into that matchup. I think Texas keeps it pretty close. And that's obviously going to be a matchup we'll probably see a lot more in the future when Texas eventually goes to the SEC, which is obviously a pretty controversial move. But, yeah, that'll be an interesting matchup, Texas and Alabama week 2. But I'm in favor of the Crimson Tide there, even though I do think Texas will keep it close. UTSA, I'll favor Longhorns there for sure. Texas Tech on the road, West Virginia and Oklahoma. I'm going to favor Texas in all 3 of those games. Oklahoma, obviously, is maybe the closest one out of those 3. But the Sooners next season, I don't think, honestly, Oklahoma's going to be quite as good. New coaching situation, which honestly could be, I'm not too concerned about that, but it's more the situation at the quarterback position. They've got a big change there. And they're also losing several key players going into next season. So Sooners, I don't really think they're going to be quite as good. I think Texas, I'm actually going to favor the Longhorns there. So I'm favoring Texas in at least 5 of their first 6 games, which I feel like if you start the season 5-1, I mean, you're in a good position. So, I mean, if you lose to Alabama in week 2, I mean, this team, unless they get absolutely destroyed by Alabama, I still feel like this team is in a good position to win a lot of games this season. Second off the schedule, though, you got some tough games in here. Iowa State, I'll favor Texas there. Oklahoma State and Kansas State. Now, Oklahoma State, I'm pretty comfortable picking the Cowboys there to get the win. I feel like Oklahoma State next season is probably my favorite to win the Big 12. I feel like Oklahoma State, Texas, and Baylor are probably the big 3 in the Big 12. Oklahoma's going to be in the background, but I just don't think that they're going to win it with their situation. So, I mean, Oklahoma State, that's going to be a crucial game there for both teams, and I feel like with it being on the road, I mean, I feel like I'm gonna have to favor the Cowboys there, but it's going to be close. Kansas State on the road on November 5th. I'm going to favor K-State there, actually. That's going to be kind of a surprise one there, favoring K-State on the road. And I feel like this Texas team, I mean, they went 5-7 last season. I feel like, in considering, I mean, this team they're going to be a lot more experienced next season, but I still feel like they're going to slip up, and there's going to be a confusing loss. I mean, for example, this team lost to Kansas last season. That was a surprising loss, if I'd say so. So I do feel like this team, they might take a surprising loss at some point this season, whether that's to K-State or, say, to a road team like Texas Tech, for example. But I feel like I'm still favoring Texas by a large amount over Texas Tech right now. But just for example, I feel like K-State, I mean, they're going to be a good team too. I think K-State could be an 8 or 9 win team next season, 7-9 probably in that range. So I'm going to favor K-State there barely, but certainly it's close as of right now. Pretty much a coin toss there. TCU, favor Texas there. Kansas on the road. I'm going to favor Texas more than 80%, but I mean, it's it's on the road. I feel like Kansas, they're going to be even worse next season if you ask me. So I'll favor Texas big there. And then Baylor at home. I will favor Texas against Baylor to finish out the season. That would be a massive win for the Longhorns if they could beat Baylor to finish out the season. I feel like Baylor, once again, as I mentioned before, Baylor, Texas, and Oklahoma State are the three teams I expect to be the best in the Big 12 next year. So, I mean, that would be a massive win for this team if they could beat Baylor, and I feel like there's a good chance that they do. So, record projection, 8-4, 2-11-1 for this team. Once again, I'll be eventually, once we get into the summer, I'll be predicting each of these games one by one for Texas. But for now, record projection, 8-4, 2-11-1 for this team. I feel like the ceiling's pretty high. I feel like this team takes one loss no matter what, but I do feel like the floor is still at a fairly high level in comparison to where they were last season at 5-7, with their floor being 8-4. So I think 10 wins is very reasonable for this team next season. That's probably the most likely number I'd say right now, but we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts and comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.